And so without any further ado, let's bring him up. Pastor Kevin James, our Associate Director.
Thank you, Moses. All right. Now that the breakfast is digested, I might have your attention.
All right.
I know how that goes with the food, fighting the food. Again, good to be here this morning, and one of the assignments is to deal with the state of the First Amendment, and the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. I believe Jefferson said that. So we'll take a look at a little bit about some cases that are affecting or revolve around First Amendment rights. Now, what I want to ask here is that the Pew Research Center oftentimes goes out, the First Amendment Center does a survey about every year with Americans and what they understand about the First Amendment. So what I want to ask you here is, first of all, how many rights are there in the First Amendment? I want to take I'm talking about the First Amendment to the Constitution would be the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Okay, we'll just narrow that down.
4.
7.
Man, 5. I can tell nobody here is taking the test for citizenship. Let me tell you, we make a lot of that. You know, people taking tests for citizenship know more about American civics than we do. But there's 5. Now I'm going to get real sticky. Name one of them.
Right to assembly. Right to assembly.
Huh?
Right to assembly.
Yeah, somebody had the first one that usually comes out, and that is the free speech. That is the most, when that question is asked, most Americans nail that thing, about 78%. Free speech in the First Amendment. Okay.
Bear arms.
Bear arms is the Second Amendment. So you're completely outside of that scope. There's 5 rights within the First Amendment. Okay. All right. Assemble.
Religion.
Okay, religion. That's 3.
Freedom of the press.
Press is 4. A right to redress government with grievances. Number 5. Okay, so all that comes here. So what we'll do is we'll do this here. So you're all like average Americans. If you take that test, it'll all be about the same. All right, here we go. Let me see if I can get this to work. Oh, I know why.
You turn it on?
Yeah, it's probably not on. I thought I did. But I did, and I turned it off. Okay, here's what the first Bill of Rights says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which most Adventists ought to know that. So when anybody calls you from the First Amendment Center and says, what's one of the first rights of the First Amendment, you're going to say, religion. Can you say amen? I mean, that is the first right. And then when they ask the question, most people say speech. It's the first thing they think of. It's really interesting how that happens. But that's actually the second one. Therefore, or abridging the freedom of what? Speech, or of the press, okay, or the right of the people to peacefully to assemble, right? And to petition the government for redress of grievances, okay? So, this is really good stuff. Because one of the things that the founders wanted to do was they were trying to conceive of the best way to govern the 13 states, all right? They were sent to Philadelphia initially to tweak the Articles of Confederation. But on the very first day, when they finally called the convention into session, they threw that completely out and said, that isn't going to work. We've got to start from scratch, okay? So just imagine this for a moment. You've got a nation that's growing up. You've got these 13 colonies. They've got their own constitutions and issues and stuff. And now you've got men down in Philadelphia trying to figure out a better way to bind these 13 colonies together. Are you with me? With all sorts of ideas and variations and needs and outlooks in there. So this is what they're doing. This is why I think it's such an amazing thing, is that these men come out with this Constitution that was talked about here today. And they didn't know where this was going to go, honestly. They had no idea. Before they were getting it out, they didn't know how it was, if it was going to work. But the two things And this is what I believe Ellen White means in that statement that Major was sharing with us many times, was, the Protestant and Republican government. What he's talking about is the founders did not want a pope or a king. You follow what I'm saying? So they wanted no pope leading over religion, or in other words, in their mind, no religion leading over, the government. And number two, they weren't going to have a king, because it was going to be done by the consent of the governed. Are you with me? That comes out of the Declaration of Independence. So the consent of the governed was this, not an unknown theory, but this was the first time this thing was going to be put into practice, where they said, eventually, because the founders, many of them, as Major Reed mentioned, didn't think about rights as such. So there's a number of other people who said yes. Now Madison, who's the father of the Constitution, argued against it at first. He said, no, we don't need any Bill of Rights. We're fine. If there's no rights enumerated within the Constitution, we're all protected. But there was a number of those delegates that said, look, our states are not going to ratify this Constitution unless we get a guarantee of Bill of Rights. Madison finally came to that side through Jefferson's influence. He said, yeah, okay, we need a Bill of Rights. And so it was Madison who not only authored or fathered the Constitution, he also fathered the Bill of Rights also as well. He didn't do it all himself. He cobbled a lot of stuff together from George Mason. George Mason and some of his material sounds also, especially on his Virginia Declaration of Rights of 1776, in May of 1776, actually has language that Jefferson and others used, especially in the Declaration of Independence and whatnot. And the idea was that we need to guarantee some rights. There were already some Bill of Rights that were going on in the states that they felt they needed to have Bill of Rights in their own states. And so a number of them said, we need to have some guaranteed rights here. And so it was settled that they would ratify the Constitution on the promise that we would have a Bill of Rights. So in 1789, we got it ratified. In the Constitution of 1791 is when the Bill of Rights were ratified, and it connected to the Constitution. Do you follow that? And one of the things that they were looking at in the Bill of Rights is what they didn't want to do was fall into this issue of warfare over religion. And that religion should not be the basis of why somebody should or should not have civil rights. Okay? Civic rights. Shouldn't be based on what you believe or don't believe. Okay? And so as they were developing all these theories and stuff like that, when I'm always talking about Protestant America and Republicanism, she's talking about no pope. There was no joining of church and state, because that was the problem with the pope. And number two, there would be no king. Okay? And that this would be by consent of the people. They just came out from under a king, didn't they? And many of those that had come. But now, they didn't. Several of the colonies didn't believe in separation of church and state. You've got to understand this. They were all very bound together, church and state. Massachusetts, Connecticut being some of the biggest ones. But what was interesting is that once they passed the Constitution, and once they ratified the Constitution, ratified the Bill of Rights, even though that just pertained to the federal government, okay, it started percolating down into the other colonies. And finally, in 1833, Massachusetts was the holdout, finally disestablished their state from the church. And so it's been a long, interesting history behind all of that. And by the way, if you want to read a good book, it's a little detailed, but I think most of it you can get. You just have to read it several times. Stephen Green, called The Second Disestablishment. Sometimes we think that we have this idea that when the founders founded the nation and gave us separation of church and state, it was just automatic all the way through. Now, that's not true. We have had 200 years of figuring out what we did, okay? Amen? In fact, they didn't even know how the judiciary was going to actually work. They just kind of stuck it there. They wanted to separate the three. They understood that. And then there's been amendments of how we, how we determine that. There was a lot more justices at one time on the Supreme Court than there are now. There's been less, more back and forth, and they finally settled on 9. And but the point of it is, this, dear ones, in America has been an experiment. Are you following me? And as this experiment, like you do in science, you keep testing, repeat, you change certain things. Can you say amen? To find out what works. Amen? Are you following? And that's what we've been doing for 200 years. So by the time you get to the Supreme Court decisions on prayer, most states in the United States have divorced prayer from schools. And what they mean by that was that a student couldn't pray. What they meant was that the school couldn't force a prayer. Are you with me? Yeah. Now that argument goes way back, and it makes sense, because the issue is, whose prayer?
Right.
Amen? I mean, if you want to talk about this issue of religion, whose prayer is going to get it? And what had happened in our history was that Protestants ran the schools most of the time. No doubt about it, the Protestant church had the upper hand. So when the Catholics were pouring into America, especially after the potato famine and those type of things, they were pouring in, causing a lot of consternation and fear in America, with immigration and all that. I think we have problems now. That was really freaky back then, too. And as they were coming in, they were protesting against the fact that the schools were only teaching the King James Bible and a certain creed and a prayer. Are you with me? And it was going against what the Catholics were teaching their children. They said, well, I don't like this idea. And so that was part of this whole argument. And so the Blaine Amendment starts coming out, not because it was anti-Catholic, but because they said, look, we need to separate this. If we're going to have this, whose religion is going to prevail? We just can't have somebody's religion prevailing. Even among Christianity, there's a lot of different beliefs. Amen? Yeah. So who's prevailing what? So Blaine wanted to get an amendment passed on the federal level. He didn't succeed. But it was saying that the government was prohibited from giving any monies, directly to school, to education. It was called the Blaine Amendment. That failed, but the states picked it up. And so everybody kind of liked that idea because in their minds, in the anti-Catholicism at that time, it was vicious. You know how bad it is for Muslims today? Think about them today. Think about the Catholics at that time. The same thing. Things that were said about them, rapists, all this, what they do with the Mexicans, same thing said about the Catholics. And so when Blaine said that, even though it didn't pass nationally, everybody was excited, because it was give the Catholics, cut them out kind of a thing. And so that's how we had this battle and belief over the issue of the Bible. That's all part of it. But the country's been battling this out for, like I said, 200 years. The Second Disestablishment will give you a very good overview of how, you had these blasphemy. We had kind of blasphemy laws in America at one time, where if you cussed and used the Lord's name in vain on Sunday, your penalty was much more than it would have been on a regular day of the week. If somebody caught you. Amen? So these things went to court, and these things were trying to be settled in court, these kind of decisions. Now, wait a minute, this is we have a civil society here where you have rights as citizens, and who imposes what right? Is it religious or whatever? So they started cutting out and separating church and state, separating these religious laws from civic society, so to speak. So this percolation has been going on for a long time, and it's been a challenge. And we're still challenged with it today. We're going to talk about that because the most litigated, amendment in the Constitution is, guess what? The first 16 words. There's more litigation on that part of the amendment than there's any place else, even on speech or anything else. We're always discussing these issues, And the amendment is very big that way too, with speech and stuff. They're very big on litigation and where it all falls and what does it all mean. So we are still, dear ones, in the process of experimentation in good old American representative democracy or republicanism or how you want to do it. It's just simply this constantly going on. And I think it's great. I think the brilliance of this country in its legal theory has been the separation of powers, the executive, legislative, and judicial, keeping that separate. And number two, our Bill of Rights, separation of church and state. Amen. All right? Because that is what has allowed us to live and breathe in freedom, to be able to speak the way we want to speak, the way we want to print what we want to print. And I think those things are what have made part of what, at least the legal theory, that's what made this country as powerful as it's been. And but we're seeing a lot of changes now. Now I want to go quickly to the Johnson Amendment and add on to what Elder Higgs so very well presented. There's not a whole lot of information out there on the Johnson Amendment. And when I say the Johnson Amendment, let me clarify what we mean here. This is not an amendment to the Constitution. This is an amendment to the tax code, You got that? So when you're talking about this amendment, this is an amendment to the tax code, not to the Constitution. all right? And it happened, and what was happening is this. We're going to ask 5 questions and try to maybe give you a little more understanding. He gave us a good talk out there, and like I said, there's a whole lot of information. I've dug as much as I can. I want to do a few more things. There's a couple of, on the net, you can find a couple of essays and things that were out there. But what it does, it governs the tax-exempt entities that can and cannot do in the political process, in the tax code. And it was authored, as you already found out, by Senator Lyndon Johnson in '54. And really what it was a political move. He was trying to stifle an opponent. And what he saw was with some of these groups that were supporting his group, not necessarily churches, but there's other entities that are 501c3. You understand that? And there was these other kind of groups that were supporting his opponent and getting all this money. See what I'm saying? It was a money issue, I think, is really what the issue was. And so he said, oh man, I don't know if I like that. So he goes and authors this amendment to the bill. And he offers it. There's no debate. There's no discussion. Hey, it sounds good to me. And it's passed. Okay? And so we didn't hear much about it until just recently. Probably, 1980s is when this thing is really starting to come out with. And I'll share with that some of what's going on there. I don't want to jump ahead of myself. But there wasn't so much churches at the time, but other tax-exempt organizations. So it was a political move. All right? It wasn't anything to try to help our strengthening our separation of church and state or anything like that. It wasn't anything to do with that. It just ended up being that way. Are you with me? That's what ended up happening. It prohibits any supply of money and any open support for or against political candidates or parties for churches and clergy. Okay, in dealing with the churches. Are you following me?
Yeah.
You see what it is? It says no money, no open support, or opposition. That was the word I was trying to say the other night. Opposition against political candidates. Okay, that's the main thing that a pastor can do in the pulpit, or anybody. No church, for example, can put out there on their property saying, we're going to have Ted Cruz for president, and oppose Bernie Sanders. You can't do any of that. You can't put it on the side of your buses at school. You can't put any of those kind of placards. You can't put that kind of material in the church. So opposition and support for political candidates is basically the only thing that's prohibited. Are you with me? Otherwise, you can do just about anything else. Okay? It's really interesting because it does get political. Now, Trump promised that he would totally destroy the amendment, as he is, he's catering to the religious right that's really brought up most of the issues on this. The president does not have the authority to do it on his own. Only Congress can appeal the law. So this law has not been appealed. It's still in effect. No matter how many president orders he throws at it, it's never going to work. Okay? Number 2, does it prohibit all political activity in churches? Well, I said no just a moment ago. Nonpartisan voter education activities and church organized voter registration drives are legal. Okay? So if they're nonpartisan, you can go out and, as many of our African American churches have already done for decades now, is to go out and get people on cars and buses and drive them to the voter booth. Can you say amen? Yeah, I know that kind of community activity is very popular and still is. And so you can do that kind of stuff. But you just can't promote, say, well, if you get in my car to go down to vote, you better vote for. Are you with me? If you're not, then get out for the wait for the next one. Amen? So that's what we can't do. Now, pastors are free to speak on any social and political issues of concern. I have no worry about being shut down on free speech. Amen? I can preach anything I want to preach. I just can't say, do this or do that. I can criticize a candidate, perhaps, but I can't give them open opposition saying, you guys can't vote for this person. Or, hey, this is a great candidate. Vote for this one. See, that's where I put not only my local church in jeopardy, but since we are an organization of such that even though it's at the local level where we do the membership and stuff like that, the payment comes through the organization. Are you with me? My paycheck. I take the privileges of what they call self-supporting ministers, okay, under the rubric of a company that pays me. So that's where it's a little different with this pastor. So if they were to change the 501c3 on us, that would be a serious shakeup with this church because we're structured in a certain way. Okay, so that's why we have to protect this. I think it's very important that we don't go off the handle and get ourselves in trouble. They can't publish issue guides for voters. That's been passed in the Congress, that you can look at a voter registry, voter cards. How did this person vote? As long as you're including all the candidates. Are you with me? Everybody who's involved, not just the ones that you want in or the ones that you want out. All right. Who wants the Johnson Amendment appeal? Yeah, who's got the big idea? Mostly white evangelical entities. I'll just be frank with you. That's who it is. And they are protesting it mostly through the Pulpit Freedom Sundays. You've probably heard of some of this. They started in 2008. The grumblings of this Johnson Amendment, though, I know goes back to 1990. I can remember it. But they really started this thing, Pulpit Freedom Sundays. And what they were doing was that the churches that were signing up for it, on this particular Sunday that was designated, every year it happens, that the pastor goes up there and just gives a purely political sermon, against a candidate or for a candidate. That's what they do, because they're trying to stick this in the eye, get something going. But other congregations have tested the limits for many years. Pew Research Center found that black Protestant churches have been more likely than other Christian groups to report having heard clergy speak out clearly on the merits or faults of a particular candidate. Are you with me? And so in your community, that's what I'm talking about, mostly African American communities here, you know what I'm talking about. And I've heard some of the preaching too. I understand the history though. Are you with me? Because you have had to organize, your history has had to organize around political activism for your rights. Can you say amen? Amen. It is the black community that kept abolition alive. Okay? I'm going to give you that. That's history. It wasn't white people thinking good about things. And the other thing is, too, abolition in the minds of America at the time, even the Emancipation Proclamation, did not mean equality.
That's true.
Okay? Never did mean equality. It's just that there were certain interests that wanted to get rid of the slave trade and all of that kind of thing. That was fine and good. That's what abolition is about, but not for equal rights. That's why you had the debate. You're aware of this debate. What are we going to do with African Americans when they're free? Well, I think we should go to Liberia. Idea, few people win. Amen? Repatriatism back on the African continent. One idea, too, was maybe we could send them down to an island like Haiti, or we could create some kind of territory like we did with the Native Americans, and we'll send them out there. Are you with me? There was a lot of interesting feelings about that whole thing. But so I understand the history as to why African Americans have a very kind of a political slant to things. Can you say amen? There's a purpose for it. Okay? Nobody else listened to it. So, yeah, I just was reading also. I got about 3 books on this going right now, reading at the same time. And that's a terrible thing to do. Because I get confused on what I just read and how, was that the author? Yeah. I'm reading about the laws of the Reconstruction area. I'm reading about Reconstruction itself. I'm reading about whole abolition, being led by African Americans. And now I'm confused. So, but the basic thing that's coming out is that, the ideas was, because, look, we know the South here, even during Reconstruction, was doing all that they could to keep African Americans unequal. Okay? They were called black codes. You're aware of these kind of things. And I know some of this horrible history. I know some of us are probably being a little uncomfortable with me sharing some of that. And I understand that. There was a book that came out that's very hard to read. His name is Douglas Black. And it's called Slavery by Another Name. And the Second Enslavement during the Reconstruction. It is tough to read. And he had, what I say that is because he had a hard time researching. He had a hard time getting into African American homes who had been directly affected by the kind of laws that he was bringing out. They just didn't want to talk about it. And what he was talking about is that, as you know your history, is that for vagrancy laws, those were murder, literally, on African Americans. They could easily get got on a vagrancy law, and what they would do is they would incarcerate them, and then that would incur a kind of a fine, that, of course, the person probably couldn't pay off. And so they say, well, okay, well, paying off, we're going to send you to Birmingham coal mines, and you can work it off. And many people never worked off the fine because there was always a new fine. And so they were enslaved and working the coal mines in Birmingham that you don't hear anything about.
Yes.
But hundreds and hundreds went there and never returned. And so we have an ugly history, you know, behind that. We're not a perfect state. We're always working with this thing as best as we can. But that's the point. I understand the history of what they do now. But that's what the amazing thing is that the IRS hasn't thought much about it. No church has lost its tax-exempt status over there. They've just been engaged in community development and betterment, like I just said. I went ahead of myself on that one. Question number 4, is this just about political speech for pastors? Well, no. It's about money and politics at its core, if you really want to get to this. Okay. If churches or clergy are allowed to participate in political campaigns, free exercise donations to churches could go to support what? Political candidates. You know, you talk about Citizens United. We don't like Citizens United because all this corporation free money. Is that right? Flow of money. No account. What happened if the church is allowed to do that? You've got Citizens United on steroids. And so that's what the idea is there. And then religious organizations could become bigger money players in politics. I mean, one statement was that a congregation could give up to a quarter of their income to political process. I don't know if I want a quarter of my tithe going into political processes. How about you? I can tell you right now, I do not. And if our church started to do it, I would be sending my tithe elsewhere. Can you say amen? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind what I would do. But our church doesn't do that. Can you say amen? So I'm glad about that. Leads to further politicalizations. That's already there. That's already happened. Can be difficult to know the line between speaking to issues and becoming politicized. So it can be difficult to know the line, but the lines are pretty clear right now. Have any churches, I want to get to this, penalized for the efforts? Not really. Since 2008, more than 2,000 churches partake in these events. Only one church was audited, but no churches have lost their tax-exempt status. In fact, I think out of the history of this whole thing, there may have been only one church that lost their tax-exempt status. One, since 1954.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, praise the Lord. So it hasn't been, see what I'm trying to come across, it hasn't been a bad amendment. It hasn't kept the church from being politicized. It's heavily politicized right now. And we know that because 81% voted for Trump. A candidate that they would be morally reprehensible to the religious right at the time. But no, this whole politicization process of the religious right has taken over. So you can rationalize getting to Trump and then saying God selected him.
Wow.
So don't you criticize him because God selected him. No, you selected him or whoever voted for him. Can you say amen? The election process selected him. God didn't select him. I hear that in Adventist church.
That's right.
Now, I'm not here to be political. I want to use that 503. But you know, what I'm talking about, the character of the candidate, you know, as opposed to what the religious right was supposed to be all about. Well, now there's justifiable criticism going on about that. All right, so we're looking at the SCOTUS and religious liberty here today. So does that help you on the amendment there some? More? Any questions on that? Because I'm going to go to another section here. Any questions on it? Yes?
Could you please explain the word SCOTUS?
Yeah, Supreme Court of the United States.
Supreme Court of the United States.
That's right. So you got POTUS, President of the United States. Are you with me? Those kind of things. I know, it's kind of a crazy, yeah, it took me a while to figure out the acronym too, so don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. You did better than I did. I didn't even ask the question. I should have. But I always hear it. SCOTUS. Yeah. You know, I didn't know what it meant, but sure, they know what they're talking about. Yes.
My question is, so does the Johnson Amendment mean that political candidates should not be able to come in churches?
No, they can come in. That's another thing. I'm glad you brought that up. They can come in as long as you're not just bringing in Democrats. Are you with me? Yeah, you got to bring in the Republican. You got to bring in their opposition. Exactly. Yes.
Your point then is that the law is on the book but it's not been enforced?
What? Not to any great degree, interestingly enough, yes, because most churches have stayed out of it as such, except for your African Americans. But there's a mixture of all of that. But you're right, yeah, even as they've been trying to stick it in the eye, IRS hasn't fallen for it.
Well, no,
Yeah, yes.
my understanding, now there is only one Protestant Supreme Court judge now.
There's none.
Oh, the other one.
For the first time, we don't have a Protestant.
They retired.
Right, for the first time, we don't have a Protestant.
Retired.
But, you know, it's interestingly enough, I wouldn't get too worried about that. I mean, even if you think about it in the history of the Supreme Court, as far as justices are concerned, you know, even those where you've got the Republicans, you know, voting in a certain group, or you've got Democrats voting in a certain justice, interestingly enough, none of those justices have really panned out as strictly down the line what they figured they were going to be voting for. Are you with me? I mean, Gorsh, just recently, is a good example of it. You know, everybody thought, yeah, we got the one we wanted, amen? And he went and sided against Trump on the executive order for immigration for the Muslim ban. So it goes to show that it hardly plays out that way. So I really don't worry about what kind of faith the justices have, because usually a good justice is not ruling based on their faith. That's been vetted for a long time. So that's for me personally. Yes.
To me, it seems like the spirit of prophecy is being fulfilled by the Supreme Court justices are now becoming all Catholic, who will make the final determination of the time of trouble.
Well, actually, I think we put too much emphasis on the court. The court is only one function of the government. Can you say amen? Like oftentimes we put a lot of emphasis on the president signing some national Sunday law or whatever. Let me give you a little bit of an insight here that maybe you don't know. 1962, 4 cases over Sunday laws were already determined. And the determination of those cases is this. Sunday laws were found constitutional. Did you hear me? Sunday laws are found constitutional as long as they're not promoting a religious purpose. So already, Sunday laws already have been chosen as constitutional. And if I remember the makeup of the court, it was the Warren Court. I think there were just a few Catholics were on that one. Are you with me? So I'm coming to show you that I don't worry too much about the faith, too much more, because it doesn't usually pan out that way. I think there's going to be bigger issues that's going to be bringing us to the point that you're talking about in the last days. It won't be the court. Okay, because like I said, the court has already passed it, okay, as far as meaning constitutional muster. See, how many of you knew that? How about the court already saying that the Sunday laws were already constitutional?
No, I didn't know.
Okay, so I don't know what we're worried about in the last days. I mean, it's already constitutional. If you say amen. All right. Okay. No, I'm just saying. Don't worry about it. I think we put way too much emphasis. I think the emphasis is, and the emphasis is not on the president. The emphasis isn't on the legislature. The emphasis is on the people. We, the people. Great Controversy says very clearly, legislators, great controversy, legislators, in order to secure popular favor, sign in the Sunday law. That tells me that when the Sunday law comes, when it becomes a real issue, is the people want it, not the legislators. Yeah.
I want a clarification. When they say that the course of the Sunday law is constitutional, what do they mean?
That's what I said, is they are constitutional. You can have a Sunday law in a particular, state or city, as long as it's not based on a religious context.
Okay.
So there's a lot of reasons why you could do a Sunday law with that. You follow what I'm saying? It's general welfare, people need rest, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So that's what it's doing. But you're not really seeing an increase of any of that. In fact, what you're seeing with blue laws and things, as Major Reed, intimated about, was the fact that those laws are just going down, down, down. They're either ignored or they're being thrown out. Yeah. Yes.
After this, I'm gonna try to be quiet.
That's all right. Raise your voice.
Okay. I feel, should worry about the Supreme Court because the Congress can make the law, the Senate can make the law, but you can petition all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Correct.
And they have right there, can be in office until the day they die.
That's correct.
And you can appeal until it gets to the Catholic, top-loaded Supreme Court justice who will do what the Pope tell them to do. And
As I said, let me take it back, sister. Let me take it back, sister. Right. The problem with your argument is that Sunday laws are already found constitutional on a non-Catholic majority Supreme Court in '62.
Right.
Okay, so I don't need the court. I'm telling you right now, you don't need the court to make this end time scenario happen. You don't need it. I'm going to be honest with you. You don't need it. You already know the history of that. It's already shown that. Yes.
Why do you think the Supreme Court voted for same-sex marriage?
Oh, don't jump ahead of things. We're going to go into that right now. How's that? Can we just move on from this? Yeah, we kind of wandered a little bit. We're going to enter the legal age zone. I'm not a lawyer, so we're really in trouble. Say amen. Now, the reason I may be able to espouse a little bit about the law, as Moses mentioned this morning, is because I read the decisions. I read the amicus briefs. I have no idea what I'm reading half the time. But no, really, what you do after you read it, I mean, when I was first getting into this with the Smith case that Elder Higgs mentioned last night up in Oregon, that I'll get into that a little bit here in just a minute. But in starting to read that case, I was lost in what I was reading. But after I got to reading, and then because they'll cite these other cases. So what does that mean? I got to go find these other cases, and I got to read those and find out. And so as I began to read them, I said, oh, this is all starting to make a little bit of sense. Are you with me? You can understand where the things are going. So I'm not a lawyer. And I wish I was in some ways. I wish we had Nicholas Miller here or Alan Reineck, who are constitutional lawyers, could parse this out a whole lot better. So just take my stuff with a grain of salt here. Can you say anything? But no, I wish it could be that way. But I read this stuff, and that's how I know. So I'm going to start with Hobby Lobby because we're going to get into this whole thing with the Smith case. And there's a lot said about Hobby Lobby. You know, I don't know whether you liked it or didn't like it or how it goes. But actually, with constitutional scholars like Alan Brownstein, who I highly respect, he's out of law in California, I think Berkeley. And we had him for one of our speakers, by the way, in our Liberty Conference here not long ago. And he likes the Hobby Lobby decision, and he explained it in a certain way on our RFRA. Now let me explain that to you in just a minute here. This was a test case for a Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. You may not know what this is, but what that is this. Before the Oregon Smith case of 1990, and this is the man right here, Al Smith, that was in the middle of that argument, called the peyote case. Remember the peyote case? Everybody always remembers peyote because they've never heard of peyote before. The peyote is it's a cactus that has a hallucinating property in it. And Native Americans have used it for centuries in their religious rites. And he, Al Smith, and a Caucasian man, I forget his name now.
Alan Black.
Was he black?
Black.
He was.
Black.
What was his name?
Galen Black.
Galen Black. He's not a Native American. That's what I was trying to say. He's Caucasian. Both of these guys worked in a drug rehab. It gets interesting all the time. They're working in a drug rehab. And they go to a sweat. Al takes Galen to a sweat. Galen gets excited about the sweat. He says, that was cool. Smoking peyote. Probably anything feels cool, smoking peyote. I've never smoked it. I've never done LSD. I did smoke marijuana and did inhale. And when you do inhale, things happen. Things, amen. I'll just put it that way. So I'm sure when you have peyote, things happen. And Galen liked it. Galen ended up getting fired. And then they were threatening Al Smith. They said, look, you know, you don't want to be promoting this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Al really wasn't. Anyway, they fired him, and they went to the state and said they couldn't get their, they went to go get their unemployment benefits, and they denied them because they'd been fired for misconduct in the workplace. So that's how it goes all the way up to the Oregon, and then it finally goes to the Supreme Court. And the government's compelling interests had to be achieved through at least restrictive means. I want to explain that in just a moment. That's what it was before Smith. After Smith, the government didn't have to find any least restrictive means if they had a compelling interest of a general applicability. Okay, so yeah, okay. That's why I said legal ace. Listen, as close. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Okay, and so the RFRA put in back in the least restrictive means, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Are you following me? 1993, basically unanimous decision out of Congress to bring that least restrictive means back into a legal analysis. Now here's an example of how this works, and I'm going to be using this young man here and this little curve man here. All right, for example, and this is a true case out of California. In the Sikh religion, you know the Sikh religion, right?
Yes.
This is not Muslim. This is Sikh. Looks very close, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This comes out of India. It's about a 500-year-old religion, kind of a mixture of Hindu, and I think there's some Muslim to it, perhaps. I'm not sure. I've only met a few of them. They're very interesting people, very peaceful people, interestingly enough. And at 12 years old, boys in the Sikh religion are given a dagger as a symbolic gesture of defense of the faith. Okay? It's part of the process. Well, now, when you got 12-year-olds going to school, can you say amen? Amen. The government has a compelling interest, amen, for safety, right? So the government says 12-year-olds have no business bringing daggers into school. Is that right? Right. Yeah, we know this, right? I mean, it's just that's common sense approach here. So the government has, listen to me, compelling interest, right, for the general welfare of this, and it's the safety. So we ban weapons, right, in the school. Well, that's butted up against this guy who needs a dagger. And his faith. Do you follow what I'm saying? And so, what do? Well, prior to Smith, the government says, okay, we've got a compelling interest. We have another dimension of this, is that we've got a person of faith in which their faith is being substantially burdened. Okay, that's another test. Does it substantially burden, which is kind of a very generalized term, but it's substantially burden of their faith. But they have this compelling interest for the general welfare. Now, the next analyst is, what would be the least restrictive means? Is there possible least restrictive means that we can come up with that we can now keep enforcing safety and yet respecting and not substantially burdening this person's faith? So what they did is they made the dagger only 3 inches or so, which I don't think was very big to begin with, and then they riveted it in the holster. It's non-functional. Are you with me? Because it's just supposed to be so symbolic anyway. So you got this boy who carries his dagger now, usually not on the outside, it's usually underneath or something. It's not out there to be showing off. And but you can't use it. You say, man, it's just like a play toy. Do you see the difference? See how wonderful that works? See, if you didn't have the least restrictive means, too bad for your faith. And that's what was happening here. You had a general law of applicability in Oregon, on the federal level especially, that peyote is illegal. And yet Native Americans have used it for hundreds of years in their religious service. So that's a substantial burden. Think about it in this way. What if the Catholics got hit with no alcohol? Yeah. Well, they did get hit with that. Did they not? Yeah, the Volstead Act. But guess what? The Volstead Act had holes in it, big enough to drive trucks through. That's why one of the reasons prohibition failed, because you had these loopholes. Because Jews need alcohol too in some of their services. So anyway, so what would happen was that people say, well, I'm developing alcohol because of my Jewish clients. Oh yeah. Can you say amen? Lots of Jews all of a sudden. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just that the idea was there were so many holes in that act. That's why the amendment failed. All the whole prohibition. One of the reasons prohibition failed. But anyway, so if they ever had that, so what do? You know, how do you make that least restricted means? And that's what they're talking about here. And interestingly enough, after this case, just a few years later, there's a Native American legislation that now peyote can be used. So even though they lost at that level, now for Native American legislation, peyote's in there and is protected. So an interesting change of things. But that's what happened. Al Smith has now since passed. But so if you understand that, I got to put that in place here because this is going to come up again and again on these cases I'm showing, like Hobby Lobby. Are you with me? Hobby Lobby becomes this test. Well, how does it become this test? Well, you've got founders of Hobby Lobby, David and Barbara Green. Now, you know something about Hobby Lobby, all of us do here, and that is if you go in on Sunday, it's closed, isn't it? Yeah, you can't go because they're they run their business very much with religious principles. They even have some kind of religious principle or statements that they have. Okay, so they're very religious, very devout Christians. And the interesting thing about the Greens is they have no issue. Okay, no, let's put it back here. I'm going to have to say that. So now the Affordable Care Act comes into law. Affordable Care Act mandates 20 types of contraception, okay, that must be in your insurance policy to your employee. Are you with me? 20 of them. They have no issues with the birth control part of it, not at all. You can have birth control, but they objected to 4 of those contraceptions that they felt caused abortions, which they are opposed to. Are you following me? So they're not against contraception. They're against these contraceptives that they believe, not necessarily science or anybody else, it's just they believe it. So what this does is now becoming a substantial burden. Not only on their faith, but even on their job, because now if they lose this case, they're going to be fined for not providing the contraceptives, which would put them out of business essentially. So this is a major issue. Okay, so how do you deal with this? Well, government's law of general applicability with compelling interest in the health and welfare of its citizens ran into this religious free exercise. See, because they said, this causes an abortion. We can't be a part of this abortion. It's substantially burdening. So it's good to provide contraception. Can you say amen? Amen. General welfare. Now, I know all of us have different views on the contraception, but just say generally speaking, it's health for women, say, okay? And so it's a good thing, but they're running into something because the Greens are to provide what they morally object to, and that violates their conscience. Not only that, they're going to get into a huge fine if they don't do it. And so Mr. Green even said, we'll have to close our stores if we lose this case. All right, so a least restricted means actually was embedded in the ACA and another avenue for free coverage of the 4 contraceptives that were under, that the Greens objected to. Are you with me? There was already another avenue within the bill itself. So the bill actually provided its own least restricted means. And so that's how they got around it. They voted in favor of the Greens on that narrow issue of the contraceptives. And they want to keep it at that narrow issue. Can you say amen? Because it's not an opening for all corporations to just force their religion on you. They were not forcing religion, okay? They were saying we object to this part of the federal law that runs into our religion. Are you with me? So actually, I agree with Brownstein. RFRA worked perfectly on this. Now, the justices that dissented on this raised up all sorts of objections. Could see in the scenario down the line that, hey, this is going to cause a problem down the line where they're going to be able to force your religion on you or whatever. I don't see that at this point, but Anyway, for this particular case, it worked very well. That's what a RFRA is. You follow what the RFRA is? It went to this bill. Now, if this RFRA hadn't been there, it would have been too bad for the Greens. Okay, that's the issue. And it would be too bad for a lot of things for churches. It would just be too bad. All right, so that was Hobby Lobby, okay? Now we're going to get into what our sister brought up here about same-sex marriage. That was the good old case of Oberfeld, 2015. All right, one of the things I need to share with you about the Supreme Court, too, which kind of goes back to our sister's statement back here, and that is the Supreme Court, oftentimes, their deliberations are being molded by the environment of society. Are you with me? That's the way it goes. And I can tell you, I don't think this decision would have passed in the 1990s. Are you with me? It probably would have not have got what you would call cert. Probably wouldn't even gotten that listened to. But over the years, since the 90s, these same-sex wedding cases actually started in Hawaii in 1990, I think it was. And over the years, though, the gay community has done a very effective job of getting society to accept, at least for them, having that orientation. Are you with me? And on top of that, we've accepted, too, that, yeah, they ought to be able to get married to whoever they love. 65% of us believe that in the United States. Okay? So the conditions in which this decision was made has a lot to do with. Now, there are legal aspects of this and how they came to this decision. Okay, well, what it starts out is there was 4 cases, Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, all had state constitution definition of marriages as between one man and one woman. Now, I found this interesting because when I was pastoring in Nevada, and Nevada has a legislature that goes every other year, I was part of a petition program because I believed that marriage was between one man and one woman. I got petitions going. I ran it through my church during potluck. Yeah, I got a little political there, didn't I? And I ran it through my potluck, and eventually Nevada put on there was enough consensus, and that would make sense because you have Catholics in the north and you have Mormons in the south. Can you say amen? Very conservative. And so the word where you get liberal is down in Las Vegas or something, but they're very conservative state for the most part. And so we were able to pass between one man and one woman. Okay? And that's where these ones were at. We've had also issues, I believe, issues that if they were married in another state that honored same-sex, like Massachusetts. Let's say you were married in Massachusetts or Vermont or something like that, where they were already legal, and you moved to Texas. You say amen? Would they recognize that marriage crossing the line? Follow what I'm saying? Because Texas, well, let's say you go to Kentucky. Okay, only one man and one woman. I mean, how do you deal with that? You follow what I'm saying? Yes. So that was also involved in this case. 2 questions to be answered by the court were these. Does, and we're going to go back to the 14th Amendment, require a state to license a marriage between 2 people of the same sex? Are you watching? So we're talking about licensing or same-sex marriage. And then, does the 14th Amendment require a state to recognize same-sex marriage license from another state that recognizes same sex? Are you following me?
Yeah. Big mess.
It is a big mess. But I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, okay? Because let's think of it this way. You and I, we get married. Amen? Get married before the parson. He pronounces you man and wife. And then oftentimes what you hear from that parson is, in the power of South Carolina, I pronounce you man and wife. Have you heard that? Well, you're understanding where church and state is not quite separate. Amen? In fact, there are some states like Alabama, you have to get married by clergy. Now we go, see, we didn't give this much thought about how we do in our marriage laws. And so early on in my pastorate, I came to a conclusion that it ain't by the power of Nevada. It's not by the power of Utah. It's not by the power of Mississippi that I'm pronouncing you man and wife. It's by God. So early on in my ministry, when I would marry people, I dropped that by the power of. Okay? I just say in the sight of Almighty God and these witnesses. You say amen? And when you use the word Almighty, that catches the attention. Amen? You know, I don't need the state of Tennessee, just that Almighty. You say amen? And when you get that, that's what you're before. Is that true? You're before the Creator, making vows before the witnesses of that, right? And so that's what actually marriage is being done by that power. But there are civil considerations now to consider with that marriage. Can you say amen? These citizens, who are citizens of the United States, have just entered into a partnership that holds legal ramifications. Is that right? You're going to look at parental rights. You're going to be looking at HIPAA rights. You're going to be looking at a whole slew of rights, retirement, you name it. You see, that's what the state is interested in, is dealing with your civil rights. That's why I do. If you were to be married by me, I would sign your certificate. Can you say amen? I would not back that up. I just don't say in the power of that certificate. That certificate simply says that you guys are recognized as legal in the state of South Carolina as being married, and you are now have all the availability of all those civil rights and protections that come with marriage. Can you say amen? Do you see where this is making sense now? Okay. Because we've already seen it that way. But now you've got a group of individuals, they want to marry the same sex. You see what's happening? And it's being denied because we're always thinking of it, no, you've got to be opposite sex. That's our historical view of things. And it is a historical view of things. I don't know if, I mean, I've understood there have been very few cultures that have recognized same-sex relations. Very few, though. Most of them recognize the man and woman. Why? Because you're not going to propagate the nation between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Can you say amen? It ain't going to happen. Marriage was part of the clanship. Marriage was a part of making your clan bigger. Can you say amen? So that's why marriage was big, because you had babies and you added to the society for which you were. That's what always been historical. Okay? And so as, of course, coming into America that is largely a Protestant background, we carry all that over with us. Can you say amen? That all didn't go away just because we put a constitution together. So we had a lot of different laws about marriage. And so basically, I'm telling you, the founders would have never seen any of the value of a of the same sex being married. Are you with me? They wouldn't have considered that. Are you with me? Forget it. Ain't gonna hurt. Natural law won't allow it. That's one of the things they probably talk about. And so, but now we're in a different age. Can you say amen? You don't have to have a man to get pregnant. Yeah. All you need is a donor. Don't even have to see the person. Will you donate this for me? Sure. I don't know who you are. I don't want to know who you are either. Just donate it. Amen? I like your genetic profile. Amen? I don't even know your name. You're donor AB 25453. Can you say amen? And I'm just going to... Are you following me? So we're living in an age now that you don't need a man. And if you're a man, you don't need a woman. Are you with me? We live in a strange age, don't we? Yeah, it's a challenging age. Okay, I'll take a... Well, no, I agree. But you don't need it in the family. You know, one of the other biggest issues about marriage was the whole idea of not just having children, but raising children under this rubric of man and woman. Okay, so I don't want to diminish that. What I'm saying is you don't have to have the presence of a man now. You see what I'm saying? It just doesn't have to be there. Yes?
Now they got this thing called, you can clone from your own self and get a twin looking just like you.
Oh, that'd be terrible. They should ban that right away if they're looking like me. The Supreme Court will rule right on that one. They'll say, we don't want it to be looking like Kevin anymore. Yeah, no, really, that's the issue, is we can do a lot of things genetically now. And that's what I would see as a sign of the last days. I would jump on that little part of the ship there, because we talk about this whole issue of amalgamation. Remember that she talks about early in the writings, later writings don't have any of that. But the point of it is that we're messing with stuff. Amen? We're messing with stuff. When we start messing with this kind of stuff, it ain't good. Yes?
Just real quick so I can understand it. Early on, marriage was a covenant, but when the state took over, it became a contract, right? And that's the argument.
Something like that. Yeah. It's still it's a covenant contract. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, within
It's just that within a society, it was always seen that within a clan or because most of our history is clans. Are you with me? That it expanded. Same way with the nation of Israel. It was just a clan. Amen? That just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so they all saw it as this is a covenant between two individuals, you know, entering into this relationship to be productive citizens of the clan.
But I mean, but the church don't saw it as a covenant, but when you get to the state, it's a contract because there's certain legal aspects.
Right, but if you look at the nation of Israel, they entered into a covenant with God, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was a contract. It was legal too. There was legal ramifications of the contract. If you murdered somebody, what? You would be killed. So what I'm saying, so there was legal contracts there. So understand that there's always it's kind of the same thing in some ways. It's not a lot of difference there.
Can I ask you a question? In the same-sex families, there's a lot of it that is involved with where I work, children being raised in those type of a family. What do you say comes about from that?
Well, there's not a lot of evidence out yet on this. This is very relatively new. There's not a lot of it. Now, there is some evidence to suggest that some kids are kind of maladjusted to a degree. But the problem is that, let's put it this way, Protestants, we haven't shown that marriage is very valuable anyway.
Yeah, come on.
So when we're having multiple marriages, and through that results of divorce, that affects children differently, but usually negatively. All right? Are you with me? So there is some evidence that when there's some same-sex couples getting together, that they have problems with their children. But the problem is that usually those same-sex couples have gone through divorce. Are you with me? So they're effectively affecting the children just like if they were in a heterosexual separation. Are you following me now?
Yeah.
So what we're waiting for is we're looking for evidence to say, okay, now we've got these families that have joined together without children but brought children into it. You see what's happening? Now we need more evidence to see what happens in that situation. Otherwise, it's mostly broken families. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's kind of complicated.
I'm going by what I see because we have a lot of that activity around the place I work.
Okay.
And you can see a lot of it in from the children reacting in a situation like that.
Okay, fair enough. My guess is, though, those families are brought from other families that were already prior existing. That's what I'm trying to talk about. What we're looking at now is we need to see evidence of where there's, let's say there's two gay men who come together in their 20s, neither have had a family, neither one have had children, but they go to the adoption agencies or they go to the, the artificial insemination situation and they get their babies. You say amen? And then we have to watch how that family, if it stays together, affects the children from that point on. How's it going to, what are we going to see in the children at that point? There is some evidence starting to come out of that because we've been around long enough on it. But that's basically what I... Now, I'm going to have to cut down some of the questions here because I'm obviously out of time. Moses?
You started late.
We're going to stay on time.
Yeah.
Are you with me on this? Now, I want to answer this lady's, Lucas' question back here.
Amen.
Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, or the clauses that they looked at here in the 14th Amendment, was Section 1B. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge, that is, curtail the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. You see what's happening there? So, making them citizens. First, to spell out privileges and immunities was Associate Justice Bushrod said, protection by the government with the right to acquire and possess property of every kind to pursue and obtain happiness and safety, subject, nevertheless, to such restraints as the government may prescribe for the general good of the whole. Okay, so that's kind of a definition of that. Although that phrase is not used very often when you're looking at legal matters. It's this phrase that became the issue. Nor shall any state deprive any person or citizen of Okay, without due process of law. So, was it legal? Was it? So what they're doing in their process is they're thinking in terms of, here you got two citizens. Are you with me? And they want to, and they're same sex, and they want to, you know, come together. Well, you can't curtail the privileges or immunities of citizens, or citizens, you see. So the issue on the side of the civil rights part of it is really what became the focus, okay, in the determination. Now, whether we agree with it or not is not the point. This is what the process became. Are you with me? Is that, how could they? Well, they did it this way. They said, these citizens, can we really withhold a right of just civil rights in a marriage? Because the problem with the marriages were, if somebody died in that same-sex marriage, where would the benefits go? Where would the insurance go? How would the HIPAA work out? You see what I'm saying? So that was an issue. You know, these people have been married. These people are you know, whatever, they've lived together. Who gets that? So they said, no, we can't do that. So let me kind of clarify this. Now, oh yeah, I forgot about D. Nor deny any person within the jurisdiction the what? That becomes the third component that says, hey, we can't turn them down for that. They're citizens.
That's right.
They're mature citizens, and they should pick whoever they want to pick as far as who to love. This is just about, and it's not about religion. Let me bring that up here. Okay, the privileges and marriages, same-sex couples, licensed in the states recognizing the same marriages must be recognized in states that do not. Marriage in this country has two components. Remember, we just talked about that. The religious component was not under consideration. Okay, so in other words, nobody can come in, same-sex couples cannot come in and force me to marry them.
Right.
Okay, that's protected very strongly, by the way. So that's just not going to happen. I mean, it could come to do that, but it's not going to go anywhere with the courts. It won't fly at all if they even try to do that. So, because religious institutions are very, very well protected at this point with this kind of stuff. So, all right, I got to keep going here. Moses, I'm working as fast as I can.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go with Trinity. So that helps you with how that came about. That's, you know, whether we agree with it or not. I'm not getting into that philosophy. It's just looking at the legal components of it. This is why it happened. 5 minutes. All right. Trinity Lutheran just came out. Was the church in Missouri that applied for a grant to have recycled rubber. Remember I talked about a Blaine Amendment? Missouri has one of those amendments. And so when they were getting this grant to get this rubberized stuff for their playground, the Blaine Amendment said, no, you can't do that. And they said, wait a minute, we scored so high, how can we be denied? And they said, because you're being a church. And they filed a petition. They held that Trinity was turned down solely because it was a religious entity and infringing upon its free exercise. So they ordered that the state of Missouri had to supply that grant material for it. Now, it doesn't, on the outside, it looks like it's not that big of a deal, but it is kind of a big deal. You're not dealing with the child care student here, I know they're trying to say, but let me show you this. In fact, one thing I didn't like about the decision is Justice Roberts didn't spend any time about the issues of establishment. He just focused solely on the free exercise. And so in footnote 3, though, he wants to say something. He says, this case involves express discrimination based on religious identity with respect to playground resurfacing. We do not address religious uses of funding or other forms of discrimination. And he says, we're narrowing it. We're narrowing it. Gorsh disagrees. He says, no, I think it should be on all forms. So what he's trying to say is that this narrow decision should be wider. That means opening the door for more funding for religion in other areas coming up. He didn't agree. He says, I'm unable to join the footnote. I worry that some might mistakenly suggest that only the playground resurfacing. See? So he said, no. Now, Masterpiece. I'm sure you want to go through Masterpiece. Amen? Can we go fast? All right? Jack Phillips was asked to do a cake for a gay couple long before marriage was in the picture. That is Oberfeld decision. Phillips kindly refuses, says his religious reasons. They sue under the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Because what they did in their commission is that you have the protected rights. Religion, gender, race, age, and disability, right? That's on the federal level. On the state level, all of those mirror that too, but some states have added gender identity and sexual orientation. Are you with me? Or one or the other, or how that works. Colorado had done that. And so when he did that, they filed with the commission and said, hey, this is discrimination. And so he says it's a point of compelled speech. And we have protection with compelled speech. You cannot be compelled to say something that you don't believe. Say amen? And he felt that doing a specific cake for gay people in that very specific, he's doing all the pretty stuff. He said that that's compelling my speech. Now, he has no problem with the generic cake that he might bake, set in the window, and for gay people to buy. So you're dealing with a compelled speech issue here. Now, interesting, we don't have the answer to this yet. They heard this in December. We don't have the answer yet. Our guess is it's going to be this, that he's going to be upheld by compelled speech, and that gays would have to purchase, but the organization would have to have a generic wedding cake. Are you with me? That's available, but you can't force a person to pay. Does that make sense? Yeah. We're just going to go through this real quickly. Sorry, Moses. I think I'm 1 minute over. Blaine Amendment was another owners of Hand On Original, talking about compelled speech. He was a t-shirt shop. This gay lesbian organization wanted to get these t-shirts. He said, no, I can't do that. The message is not right. He wins in that court, but that's still on appeal right now. Okay, it's the Supreme Court. Sewer. Sewers, outhouses, and religious liberties. Who would think sewers? You got a sewer out there. Yoder Family Trust, Sugar Grove Area Sewer Authority on shunning the use of electricity. Topography such, at least that they're claiming, can't do you have to have a small electric pump to get the sewage to a sewer system that's adjacent to their property. And so they're in a big to-do about that. Okay. And finally, I'm going to want to close with this, Moses. You've probably heard about California going to ban the Bible bill. Has anybody heard that? It's been flying all over the internet. That's crazy. Let me give you some explanation on this. Finally. Bill does not ban the Bible. Okay, I just want to really make that clear. The bill does make sexual orientation change efforts, commonly called reparative therapy, as defined by the bill, an unlawful business practice under the states. That's a quote, by the way, out of the bill. Here's another quote out of the bill. This bill seeks to ban both the practice of sexual orientation change efforts and the advertising or offering of this services. It's a false advertising bill, business bill. Theoretically, though, churches, Christian therapists, bookstores, even churches could be found on the wrong side of the law for offering such services or advertising for those kind of services. That's the thing that we are concerned about on that. But it outlaws even Christian or non-Christian services that say there's a person of faith who struggles with gay orientation. Are you with me? And they're convicted that their life is not in accordance with God if they're living the gay lifestyle. Are you following me? So they need assistance. So they go to a counselor or a pastor or somebody to seek that guidance. How can they deal with that struggle? And this happens a lot. This is not just, I'm not just giving you off the top of my head. Right now in California, if that was to pass, that person couldn't go to anybody. So really, in effect, what the bill does is anti-gay rights. Because you're telling the gays just that they've got a matter of fact, I think I have it right here. It determined a person's sexual identity with the assumption that everyone who experiences same-sex attractions is perfectly happy and content with that. Well, that's not true. Or individuals should throw caution and conscience to the wind and just accept the orientation. So that's what the problem is with that bill. Thank you. Sorry, Moses. I think I'm 2 minutes over. Boy, it's looking bad. I'll tell you. I'm starting to get that look. I see you